Good afternoon. Welcome to the second annual Tales and Ales at Axes and O's here in Sterling, Virginia. We're going to be conducting interviews with our vendors, artists, and food and authors. Right now we have
John Binks, nice to be here. Appreciate you talking today.
welcome. John, tell us who you are, a little bit about your business, and what you're doing here.
Yeah, well, certainly happy to. I think it's kind of interesting. We look at the venue that we're at here, Axes and O's. When they first opened up, I was playing in the very first Axe League they had here. So I enjoyed doing that and kind of working my way through that process. So it's an amazing place. Myself, I'm former military and recently retired from federal service. I was the chief of IT management. And, people always ask me what prompted me to kind of write my book. And I'll tell you, it's kind of an interesting story. This is several years ago, so I'm getting into my office in DC, and my political, he gives me a call on the phone, and he says, I'm like, yes, sir. And he said that driving in that morning, he was listening to WTOP radio, and he noticed that AI was all over the radio. So he says, John, run down to Best Buy, get me a couple of AIs. It's going to be something big. And I'm like, you just don't run to Best Buy and buy an AI, right?
And AI, what are we talking about here for the people that don't
Yeah,
know?
artificial intelligence.
Okay.
So I thought it was pretty funny, and it made me start thinking: how do you manage up, right? When you have senior leadership that might not have a good understanding of some technologies, right? So that's the reason when I wrote my first book, Bots and Bosses, and again, it's the idea of being able to manage in the age of AI. And I enjoyed doing this. It was the first book that I've ever written. I was very fortunate. It did well. And I realized over time, of course, when you write about technology, about the time of this podcast, there's going to be a whole nother technology, right?
That's right.
So at that point, someone had mentioned to me, it's like, well, why don't we go through and let's look at something like bots and bytes? Let's come up with another. All the stuff is going to be bots and something. So bots and bytes. And I realized after this one was released, a lot of folks don't understand the difference between artificial intelligence, machine learning, ChatGPT. They get them all mixed up. So that was the purpose of that second book. And then the most current book is Bots and Brilliance, 101 Things You Should Know About AI. And it kind of goes through these small little things. So I've enjoyed that. They've all been Amazon bestsellers. They're available on Barnes & Noble, at Target, Walmart, anywhere you buy your books. I've been very fortunate on those books to then be able to start a podcast and do a lot of shows with folks and do a lot of interviews and being kind of out and about in the technology space. So it's a passion for me, and I probably answered too much questions already, but that was the start of it. Yep.
So as an author, how much AI do you use?
That's a great question. That is a really good question. So a lot of it depends on what the form factor is, right? So after I wrote my first book, I wanted to have that available on Audible. So, a narrative, right? To be able to listen to an audiobook. And I was out with some friends and they're like, I'm like, wow, these guys are really expensive to do, audiobooks, and I'm like, let me see if technology can do the audio, right? That totally makes sense. Now that was, several years ago, and I did a lot of research and I found what I thought was like the most, the best, text to voice that was out there. It's a commercial version of a product. And as I went through that, I was like, this is perfect. I mean, I had people listening to the audiobooks and they were like, wow, that is definitely a human.
Yeah.
And I submitted to Audible. And at the time, Audible did not allow voiceovers that are digital. So you can't have a computer doing or AI doing your voice. So then I had to wind back and go the other way. But certainly try on that. When I look at being able to do books that are on technology, I want to be able to use technology. So I start thinking, well, what am I really trying to do? And I use it as kind of a sounding board, and I use different large language models. And I've actually programmed large language models for my taste, my flavor, my kind of the brand and those types of things. So, I will use it for that. And of course, at the end of the day, and I tell this to everybody, you got to have a human in the loop, right? This is not sitting there pushing a button and then all of a sudden it just goes to print.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So how many books have you published?
So I published the three books that I mentioned: Bots and Bosses, Bots and Bytes, and Bots and Brilliance.
That's a lot of B's right
It's
there.
a lot of B's, right? You can kind of see a trend there, And what I wound up doing, it's actually kind of funny. My son He's down in Florida, and he sells these off-road vehicles. You know, those kind of like those things you might see in front of Home Depot and that type of stuff. But the ones that he sells are for orange groves and cattlemen, and those things are about $30,000, right? They're very expensive. And he told me, he's like, Dad, all of a sudden, on the weekends, mom and dad will come in and they'll have the little rugrats with them. And, they're like, can I go to McDonald's? I want to go. And he's like, I can't keep them there because we got to go. The kids have got to get their nap. And I said, what about giving them the coloring book? Right. So one thing led to another. And Austin and I, my son, we went through and made a coloring book on these four-wheel drive vehicles. And we decided to make it progressively more difficult. So
Yeah.
the very beginning is very simple little coloring, and then it gets a little more difficult, and you have crossword puzzles. So he's been able to hand those out, and I have them here today as well. And he outsold me 100 to 1. He outsold me 100 to 1. I mean, I love the technology books that I do, but when grandma comes up or grandpa comes up and they're like, I got 3 grandkids. So they're buying 3 coloring books at a time.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, he's like, hey, do you like technology? And, somebody might say no, and they go to the next booth or whatever. Right. So
Sure.
yeah, he did a killing on it. I'm real happy for him.
So
Real happy.
out of the books that you have right now available, which should you start with?
So I think it depends on what you want to learn. If you are new to management and you want to try to figure out how do I incorporate, how do I deal with that, I would definitely say the first book, which was my first book, Bots and Bosses. I would venture to say then the easiest book to read is the Bots of Brilliance, 101 Things You Should Know About AI, because it's in nice little small little chunks, and it makes for easy reading. And I jokingly say you could read all the books. My books don't teach you how to program AI. That's not what it's about. It's my understanding technology, understanding terms, understanding what these tools can do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Tell us something that the readers and the customers would be surprised to learn about you.
Surprised to learn about me. Good question. And by the way, none of this is scripted for those that are out there, right? So you had mentioned using technology in some of the work that I do.
Sure.
So I decided one day, and this was about 2 years ago, I'm understanding, people are talking about, especially authors that I hang out with, they're like, AI is going to kill, authorships and that kind of stuff. And some folks, matter of fact, one of the gentlemen that's working behind the camera right now is into music. So I decided I'm going to do some exploratory work. I'm going to see what I could use technology for music. So follow me on this. I started doing research. What makes a good song, right? Beats per minute, duration, tempo, type of instruments. What type of instruments are good in good songs, right?
Mhm.
And put all of these things together and then realizing then what makes a good album, because you can't have the same type of song throughout the album. Something's got to be a little faster here, a little slower there. And I started, and again, this took months to do, and I used technology to create a full audible album, a music album, anywhere you get your music, right? Whether it be, Apple Music or Pandora, that type of, it's an entire album. And it is, for my when I grew up, I used to play in a garage band in the old days, right? And each one of the sounds, I'm actually using a mixing board, on the computer, but I'm using a mixing board to increase the horns or decrease the guitar. So, it's a combination in my thought of how can you use technology to learn, and that's what I was doing it for. And believe it or not, it does really well. There's a lot of people that are downloading those and buying those the music album and that kind of stuff. So
that's very
something
creative.
A lot of folks don't know that about me.
So besides here right now in Axis and Ale at our market, for where can people find your books?
Certainly. A lot of times I'll be at Barnes and Nobles. So as far as being in person, you can certainly go to barnesandnobles.com. You can go to walmart.com, target.com. So anywhere that you might get something. The most obvious one is going to be on Amazon. So you can just go ahead and just type in my name, John Binks, and Binks, and you'll be able to get it there. Of course, my website is botsandbosses.com. And there you can take a look at the music, and you can download, all the Audible books. It's all available through that website as well.
Yeah. Great. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Well, I appreciate that.
Enjoy the festivities today.
Yes, it's been great, and a good shout out to Tara here at Axis and others for kind of letting us do this.
Hosting the event. Yeah, this is great today.
All right, cheers.